Ethan, you don't belong on this podcast feed. What are you doing here?
You asked me here.
Yeah, that is true.
And I got to tell you, you may not be excited to be here, but I'm excited to be here.
I am excited to be here because I'm excited to talk about this movie. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are here. We're doing a little bit of a side project for keeping it real. We are going to be discussing the Star Trek movies, me and Ethan, solo. And I'm excited because I've never seen
wrong franchise. But
yeah. What did I say?
Solo. Not a character.
Oh, yeah. Ha ha ha. No, I'm just kidding. You would.
And that's the level of comedy you're going to get, folks.
I'll say Ethan comes in strong with the dad jokes. He knows his demographic well. He knows his demographic well. No, I'm just kidding. This is going to be a little bit different of a show for us. You know, usually we're waxing philosophical over on Punch Counter Punch amongst, talking about the news and other stuff. But there's an element of kind of going back to our roots, at least for me, which one of the very first podcasts I did with you was actually Star Trek, The Wrath of Khan. And it was around that period in time where I was kind of like, I don't know if I like Star Trek really, because that was around the time Wrath of Khan had come out. And then the second movie, or not the second movie, the new one, what was it called?
You're talking about what had just come out, the J.J. Abrams movie.
Yeah.
Star Trek, then Into Darkness, then Beyond.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Into Darkness, that's what it was. And Khan shows up. Benedict Cumberbatch, what a guy.
Yeah.
Well,
and you were on the fence. I do remember that. We had several conversations.
Like, it's not, it's lacking. It's, whatever. Well, now I've had some time to think on if I want to go to these movies or not. And here we are.
Yeah. No. So. And it's a great time to do it because Star Trek's going through a little bit of a revival now. And my misgivings aside, I feel like it has stumbled quite a bit trying to get itself out of the gate with Discovery and then Picard and then some of these animated series that may or may not be good. I've not watched the animated series yet, but I'm actually kind of half considering it based on some of the feedback I've heard from friends. But now with Strange New Worlds, it feels like Star Trek is now starting to remember what it was. And coming back around to being that thing that it was coming out of the 60s and got rebooted here in the end of the 1970s. And it's an exciting time, actually, if you're just wanting to get interested in new Star Trek, because there's a lot out there now to consume. And some of it is actually pretty decent and has connective tissue to what came before. And so, it's a great time for that. And it's a great time to take a look back at what Star Trek used to be. So yeah, props to you for being man enough to say, I'm going to devote some time to this.
Yeah. And I mean, I think, Star Wars is in such a good place for me personally right now with a lot of these shows coming out and stuff. And I'm excited about it. But to me, I always kind of like think back to the pop culture perspective of Star Trek in a lot of ways, which is, it was always Star Trek versus Star Wars, and you had your Star Trek fans and your Star Wars fans that were always like at war with each other, or that's at least how Family Guy made it seem, like the hardcore of each of those. Very rarely did you find someone who liked both equally,
Yeah.
And I want to see what it's all about because it's such a big series. It seems like it's right up my alley, and especially now, after some time has passed. I'm excited to go through it. Well, I booted up, first of all, let's talk about the movie a little bit. Star Trek, the motion picture, released what year, Ethan? Do you know?
1979.
Rated
G for general audiences.
Yeah. Do you know how long this movie is?
I want to say 2 hours. It's somewhere between 10 and 15. I can't remember exactly.
2 hours, 12. You got it. Yeah, dang, super fan over here. Good God.
I've seen this movie a billion times. Yeah.
Yeah. So on IMDb, it says, when an alien spacecraft of enormous power is spotted approaching Earth, Admiral James T. Kirk resumes command of the overhauled USS Enterprise in order to intercept it. And then a little bit further storyline, a massive alien spacecraft of enormous power. Like I said, he's ordered to take command of the USS Enterprise for the first time since her historic 5-year mission. The Epsilon 9 space station alerts the Federation, but they are also destroyed by the alien spacecraft. The only starship in range is the Enterprise. After undergoing a major overhaul and dry dock orbiting Earth, Kirk rounds up the rest of his crew and acquires some new members and sets off to intercept the alien spacecraft. However, it has been 3 years since Kirk last went into deep space. Is he up to the task of saving Earth? So, this movie is 2 hours and 12 minutes. Is that long for a movie that came out in 1979? Or is that
about average? Okay. Considering who the director is, it's rather short. But that Robert Wise is a very old school director, and a lot of his influence dictates the pacing of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, West Side Story, The Sound of Music.
Yeah,
there's a lot of famous movies in there. Stuff that he's done.
Yeah.
So I didn't really know what to expect going into this movie. I know that the OG series is pretty dated, by today's standards. I mean, I saw booted up the first episode, and you can see a clear line of makeup on Spock's face, and it's he looks like a plastic figure, and it's whoa, but I was paying attention, just kind of the back and forth, and it was actually surprised me how well it was actually holding my attention. I will give full disclosure. I watched this movie while playing Destiny 2. So you could say that I'm scalping this movie a little bit. If you know, what scalping it is. And don't try and Google it, especially if you're driving. But those who know, and that's all you need to know.
And if you do Google it and something comes up untoward, sorry about that.
Yeah, exactly.
That was completely unintentional.
Someone's driving. My God,
why would they say that?
Good Lord, man. Mother of God.
Yeah. Apologies for that. But
okay. God. Anyways, so take everything I say with a grain of salt, because, and I'm not really going to argue too hard on this movie. I feel like it's a casual watching experience that I personally, went through, but I feel like I'll probably watch this movie again with a more devoted eye, because there's a lot of detail there, and there's a lot of really interesting concepts. And honestly, this movie really reminds me of 2001: A Space Odyssey, in so many elements thematically, but literally the blockbuster version of the blockbuster popcorn movie version of 2001: A Space Odyssey is what we got here.
And yet this movie got the reputation of being called the non-motion picture because people thought it was too slow and too plotting.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm watching this movie, and it's okay, we're 19 minutes in. There's been 5 lines of dialogue. Most of the dialogue has come from aliens so far. And we're really spending a lot of time on the Enterprise here, watching it, and all this music. And it was well executed. And I can only be thinking the time period, 1979, you see the Enterprise glow up on screen. I mean, it wasn't as crisp as the 4K version was, but I was trying to put myself there. And it's this would have been freaking awesome.
Yeah. Two things since we're talking about that particular sequence, and that's it's close to 5 minutes of a little shuttle pod with William Shatner and James Doohan, Scotty and Kirk riding around looking at the starship. And for a modern audience looking back at it, they would take a look and say, what is the big deal? Why is this taking so long? But you have to remember that this was a ship that had not been seen on screen in over a decade on television or in film, because the show ran from 66 to 68 at the end of 68, and it was done airing, right? And then the only way you could see it after that was syndication, when it would be not syndication, but when the networks would pick it up and then would replay it late at night. You got to see it was late at night on your television screen, and generally it was going to be in black and white or a bad color, vacuum tube television. That was the quality of it. Well, Douglas Trumbull was came on late in the production and completely he applied his acumen to this film. Douglas Trumbull was actually the DP or shot the models and everything for 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Oh, wow.
And so they brought him in for this movie. So when you say there's a connection to 2001, you're not wrong. Douglas Trumbull actually got the camera, set the model up, lit it, and did all of these tight shots because he knew the fans were ready to see the Starship Enterprise. And this time it was a high definition, detailed model. And he shot in, he shot it cinematically so that people could spend some time and say, yeah, this is the Enterprise that we love. And it may look a little bit different, but it's still the same one from the TV show. It's just been updated. And so if you were a fan sitting there and for the first time in over 10 years, now you're seeing your beloved Starship again on the big screen. Well, this was amazing.
Yeah.
And so that's why they spent so much time with it. And the Jerry Goldsmith score that goes along with it just is hand in hand, hand in glove.
Well, and I just, I'm trying to place myself in, and I feel like the question comes up is like, does this movie stand alone? Because this is such a big deal. And to the modern audience, it'd be like, no, if you had watched the entirety of the Star Trek series, yeah, probably it's a bigger deal. But for most people, I don't know if it's going to connect the same way. All I can think of is, this epicness, which we're so used to, like instant gratification, things moving along. And don't get me wrong, like I'll never forget being in the theater and seeing like the shield ships, gunships rising out of the water and Captain America, the Winter Soldier. And I just remember at the time being like, whoa, like that is rad, but it was just like a split second, whereas this kind of takes more time to really establish the Enterprise as a character that deserves respect.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I start to kind of connect the dots why people have this affinity, in the same way for like the Millennium Falcon. It's like this girl who hasn't proved herself at all. We don't know her. Why is she driving my ship? That type of thing. And I kind of get it, even as someone who never watched a lick of Star Trek back in the day. And this is, coming off of, I've only seen literally the new movies and Wrath of Khan. That I watched a few years ago. So this is a little bit different experience for me. I have to say my personal opinion of this movie is I feel like this is the perfect movie literally to have on in the background. Like,
yeah.
But it also
because for a large part of it, it's a music video.
Yeah, literally, especially like whenever the space travel. And one thing I did kind of appreciate was there's a moment whenever they're having, kind of like their hyperspeed moment and like they're blurry, they're kind of shifting. And for the time period without any modern visual effects to get that point across was actually pretty smart and actually pretty cool in my opinion. But it immediately made me think of, wow, Interstellar really ripped you guys off because literally it's the same thing. And, I feel like Interstellar is like this love letter to the sci-fi movies of old. And I never really realized that until watching 2001 as well as this movie. And I'm sure that will continue.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another thing I noticed about this movie, the story, first of all, would you say, because I mean, I guess, would you say that this does a good job of kind of establishing that, we're on a new frontier. We're really trying to break the barriers beyond what we already know. Like there's more out there than just our current technology. Even though we've come so far, there's more there. Would you say that's the overall theme of the movie?
The interesting thing about coming off of the 3 years of the TV show is the TV show did I don't know if you want to call it a good job or now not a good job, considering what a franchise it's become. But the show never limited itself. It never really defined what are the borders of the Federation.
Yeah.
What is the mandate and thing. There were elements that they touched on that have carried forward throughout the franchise and have influenced further storytelling, but they never really drew, lines to box themselves in. And this movie carries that idea forward. So, the story itself was written and rewritten and changed and written again. And it went through 3 different writers. Obviously Gene Roddenberry had a massive hand in the story itself. And he had a particular vision that he wanted to carry forward from the show to the movie. And then it went through Harold Livingston, which is a very tenured, very respected screenplay writer. Alan Dean Foster, he went through it as well. And so at that point, because of the troubles that were in production and butting heads between Gene Roddenberry and the others that were involved in putting the story together, there are some elements of the story that don't seem to line up or mesh just right, or feel like they're too long or too excessive. But all in all, you can watch this movie and you can imagine, okay, yeah, this is only 3 years after the last episode that we saw. And it does have a continuity to it that feels very genuine. And so if you were a Star Trek fan of the old television show, you saw the old television show in the motion picture. And so it felt very connected to what had come before.
Yeah. And that was kind of my thing. Is it's interesting to see a TV show go to the big screen, whereas now we're kind of having this reverse effect where we've had these mega hit movies, right, that have now they're trying to box themselves in a little bit more and be a little more concise and condensed and a little more spread out, in this medium. And it's just interesting to kind of see this reversal of, we're kind of getting back to that era where people want to watch movies at home.
Yeah.
People want to have these characters they love in a convenient space. I'm me, I love the theater, but those times of you got to go see this at the theater, those are few and far between to me these days. I do not think every single Marvel movie is a must watch in the theater. I just don't. Yeah. I don't believe that. We went and saw Doctor Strange and it was a heaping pile of crap. So it's like, no. And I didn't see Shang-Chi in the theater. There's too many resources out there, and technology has come too far in terms of quality to say you have to watch this in the theater. I reserve that for a handful of movies. Like, to me, The Batman, I went and saw it 3 times in the theater. It was awesome. Same thing with Dark Knight Rises. Well, I saw it maybe like 10 times in the theater. There's like Star Wars, to me, needs to be seen in the theater. And if this ever comes to the Alamo, the motion picture, I want to see the Enterprise on the big screen, because to me, right, I feel like, yes, this was nice to watch this, but I would like to be watching this on a bigger screen, even though I can appreciate its qualities, from the confines of my own home.
I have grown up watching this movie only on television. And while I have a 70-inch television on my wall and can watch it in well, not quite, it's not a 4K, so I don't see the full 4K effect, but I see it in 1080p, and it's a great picture. But I've never seen it on a movie screen, and I do desperately want to see that. I have seen Wrath of Khan in a movie theater on the big screen, and it's glorious. It's amazing. Yeah. It's like, so I do want to see motion picture there too.
Yeah, I mean, I'll definitely let you know. We'll have to go watch it together, because I'd be down for sure. We can get some Star Trek themed food. But
that's a great point, and it's just great to talk about it here with the motion picture, because this was a franchise making that transition from television to the big screen, and it would become now an established franchise for the next 10 years throughout the 80s and into the early 90s, and would spark a resurgence in the television shows that would come later: Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, etc. But you make a great point.
I don't think I've ever heard you say those words before, Ethan. No, I'm just kidding. Go for it.
No, it's a great point in that, we had Star Trek: The Motion Picture coming in and establishing basically a decade of those films. But now we've had the J.J. Abrams films, and they weren't that successful because audiences have kind of shifted in how they want to consume that type of storytelling, that type of content. And now we see Paramount saying, all right, how do we continue this franchise forward?
Yeah.
And now we see them going back to longer story form on a streaming service, going back to television. And it's interesting that we've seen it emerge from television onto the big screen, and now it's kind of going back. And while I may think that it stumbled a little bit getting back on its feet, it seems like it's heading in the right direction now. And so, who knows how long we get Star Trek storytelling on television again.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to be said with Star Trek in particular on television. I personally miss the days. I think the only thing that really comes close these days is probably maybe Stranger Things, of a show that like literally some crazy portion of America, of the world watches every time it comes out. There's only those shows are dime a dozen. Well, Star Trek was that show. Like my parents watched,
absolutely.
My parents watched Star Trek. Like what? Like, everyone watched it, even Next Generation. I don't think they really watched, the original series, but Next Generation was another good example of, look, have a solid cast of people doing something very specific, and with as widespread as Star Trek has gotten now, just in terms with all the different, you've expressed some upset about some of the story beats and character beats, especially. I really think Star Trek as a whole is really for a specific group of people. With as widespread as it's gotten, just with all the different stories and shows, and I don't really know how it all connects yet, really. I feel like Star Trek is really for a specific niche of people. I don't think Star Trek was ever really meant to be this big bombastic, like, blockbuster popcorn, Avengers rival, whatever you want to call it. I think it was really meant to kind of stay in the same vein of kind of like what you're saying, like a slower story, like, oh, did you see my text? A slower, not, and slower is the wrong word. I love good political intrigue, and this takes all the fantasy out of what Star Wars does.
Yeah.
And literally makes it the politics more serious, because you have legit, races of all these different, beings doing this thing, and, trying to figure out, it's full of political intrigue. And I wouldn't consider that inherently slow, but it's not really meant for everyone. And I understand wanting to make, have a sense of adventure in Star Trek and action, but I don't really think that was ever meant to be the sole purpose and focus of what Star Trek really is. I think it's more about discovery. Go ahead.
It is. It is about the human condition. And Gene Roddenberry's goal for Star Trek was to show humanity in a positive light, and show what humanity could achieve if they put their mind to it and put some of their foibles behind them. And that is kind of the root of what Star Trek is. So when you see Kirk and McCoy and Spock, and like in this particular movie, they're up against an unknown.
Yeah.
And when up against the unknown, they don't start crying. They don't lose their minds. They don't cuss at each other. They look at the situation, and they rely on their training, and they elevate and elevate themselves to the situation, and match to the situation, and make decisions. And some of them may not be the right decision, but they make decisions. They face the consequences. They deal with it at a mature level, and the outcome comes to them. And it's a good outcome there at the end. Yeah. And so that's what Star Trek was all about. And that's why I say modern tellings are a little different, because it is about the emotion and broken people figuring things out. But that's because of the times that we live in. It seems like there are a lot more broken people now than there were 50 years ago. Just in general, that's the way society seems. Society seems more broken now. Yeah. And so that's the type of storytelling that people lean toward. It's not what I grew up with, though. I would rather see the elevated humanity.
So what you're saying is Star Trek, which people from 2 generations ago watched, and then parented people, and then those people parented me. So what you're saying is Star Trek is the root of my suffering.
Well, no, that's one way of looking at it.
I'm joking. No, I totally get what you're saying. It's crazy to me how much more simple storytelling, was. And it generally blows my mind that they thought it was, at that period in time, it wasn't crazy to have this, kind of like you said, just this 2.5 hour long music video of sorts, because it was a spectacle. Yes. That was kind of what I had to remind myself as I was continuing to watch this movie, is like, this is supposed to be a spectacle.
Yeah.
This is the end game of the time, basically, Yeah. Go ahead.
So something else to think about is this is 2 years after Star Wars, right? And Star Wars turned the music or the movie, the cinema world on its head, right? And nobody had seen anything like Star Wars. And then if you look at the movies that were being made, with exception to 1978 Alien and 1979 Star Trek, take a look at some of the other stuff that came out there. There's a movie called Star Crash that, if you're looking for just something to laugh at on a Friday night, if you got nothing better to do, pull up Star Crash. That was intended to be in the same vein of Star Wars. But you look at it and you're just like, this is laughable. They could not achieve the same level. And, as 1979, there was just a few weeks after motion picture came out, Disney released The Black Hole. And that was supposed to be their big entry into the sci-fi world. It was supposed to be this spectacle. It's not great. It doesn't, there are some great shots, but it's not at the same level of what we get in the motion picture and in Star Wars, Alien. You'd lump that in there. This was the start of when cinema started to get it right, started to get it really good. Well, and you lump motion picture in there too, because you're right. It was a spectacle.
Well, and it was a spectacle in the sense, as well as, you have this giant ship on screen, but this movie does a pretty good job of setting the tone of mystery.
Yes.
In the beginning, especially, what are those, the Klingons in the beginning, like their ship kind of goes missing and you're like, whoa, like, what is that? And, once it's revealed kind of what's going on, and then they've just breached the surface of all this stuff that's going, it's like, after this movie's happened, it's like, all right, yeah, we're on the right track after one TV show and a movie. It's like, yep, we've barely scratched the surface of what's out there, and just leaving it open to that. Kind of like what you were saying earlier. I think that's awesome. And really, to me, after watching this, like, of course, I was playing a space epic alongside this at the same time.
Yeah.
It is impossible, and I mean absolutely impossible, to say that this movie isn't just as responsible as everything, for everything we see in modern sci-fi as Star Wars, but in a different way. It's the grounded side, whereas Star Wars is the fantasy side. This movie is really, to me, like, this is what Mass Effect. This is how Mass Effect comes into play. This is how No Man's Sky. Like, I don't know why, but to me, like, the idea of knowing there is something out there, but not knowing what that thing is yet, it's just awesome. I love that, especially, when is Star Trek supposed to take place? Like 2023 something or other. What is it?
This is 2280s. 2280s, somewhere in that range. So it's 23rd century. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Where Star Wars is that fanciful, fantastic.
Yeah.
And what if, Earth didn't exist? What would a galaxy be like that you just gallivant around in? That's that. And you're right. 77 launches that fandom. Well, you're right. 79 and Star Trek. And what if we leave Earth and 250 years from now, what's it going to be like if we apply science and our considerable intellect to doing things the right way? Well, Star Trek is the ideal, right?
Yeah.
And so it launches that fandom out of the 70s as well. And it was a great time to be interested in sci-fi or science fantasy. And both, the motion picture does not happen without Star Wars. And so you have these two sides that are saying, which is better, Star Wars or Star Trek? Well, they really kind of grew up out of the same thing. You can say one is better than the other. That's your own opinion. Neither one of them exists without the other, though. Not today, not the way they exist today.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it's one of those things too. It's like I'm breaching interest, with Star Trek, and it's like I want to dig into more, but it's like, even just looking through to see what our journey, and which, spoiler alert, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, we will be going through every single Star Trek movie. It's just gonna be that's what's happening. And who knows, if we get footloose and fancy free, maybe we'll even go through the shows. I wouldn't mind doing that. There is an element of being overwhelmed, and I think about, for once, I can actually kind of empathize with my wife, because usually I'm the nerd. I'm the one that's like telling her all this geek stuff about whatever, but here I am in terrain that's very, foreign to me. It's like, wait, well, this is sci-fi, but like it's like actually realistic, and it's like it's this is a weird place to be in for me.
You have an interesting opportunity here with this podcast, in that you're just getting into it. I've heard a lot of discussion is what would be the top 5 or 10 episodes you would give someone if they were just coming to Star Trek for the first time. That is something that we could very easily do. Just pick 5 to 10 episodes and discuss those.
Yeah.
And at the end of that, if you want to continue on with it, bless you. Go forth.
God bless you.
But you don't have to discuss all of it here. It would be difficult to do so because there is so much content.
A lot there. Yeah, there's definitely desire to go and explore this universe more. And and we're not done with this review. I'm just kind of wrapping up one portion of this discussion. I'd like to take a look at the cast for a moment, and
Sure.
kind of their characters. So let's start with William Shatner as Captain James T. Kirk. I think one thing that's always kind of been appealing to me from what I know about Captain Kirk is seems like a guy who's never really afraid for the most part. And the thought of him being scared to go into space feels very wrong, even from a very casual Star Trek fan. Why would he be, maybe apprehensive to go back into deep space? Is it because of what had happened in the show? Or do you think they just use that as an opportunity to kind of set a new tonal shift for the character and kind of push that forward? Well, I mean, what's the context there?
I know you mentioned that in the summary of it, but at no point in my watching this movie have I ever thought that Captain Kirk is scared to go back out there.
Yeah.
He's apprehensive. He's apprehensive because he knows things have changed and it's been a little while for him, but he's not scared to go back out there. He's taking over a ship that he's not familiar with because he knows there's a danger out here, and he's willing to head out and face that danger regardless of how he feels internally. And he's very much internalizing whatever apprehension he may feel. The nice thing is he's got 2 close friends that are there to help him through this process.
Yes, Spock and McCoy.
Yeah,
which the power trio, you know what I mean? And I have to say, who's the guy that plays McCoy in the new Star Trek?
I forget his name.
Dang it. Well, he's great. I love him.
He's awesome.
He's hilarious. Yeah. They really nail this dynamic though. And Leonard Nimoy, I mean, I'll never forget going over to your house to record after he died. But this guy's like Yoda, like this is in a way like almost like the Yoda of Star Trek, in my opinion, like just iconic, and just so cool. Like whenever he like comes up behind that guy and like just grabs him, and you can tell he barely grabs him, but just the look on his face, that is a stone cold killer. The look he like has in his eyes. And I know that kind of comes from like his race of, what is he freaking, what is
Vulcan.
Vulcan. Yeah. That's a big thing. Like they're kind of emotionless, right? Or supposed to be.
Well, so they have emotion. They just work very hard at suppressing that emotion.
Yeah. Suppressing that. But, kind of giving a little bit of context for what Spock has been up to, because we see him doing something a little bit different in this movie. So kind of, can you kind of fill in the gaps as to kind of, let's just focus just on Shatner or Kirk, which we did. We kind of talked about his apprehension. We don't really know what he's been up to.
Yeah. Well, he's been a desk jockey for 3 years. They bumped him up to Admiral. He got off the ship. He's been on Earth for 3 years at Starfleet Command. So he's a little rusty when it comes to his space legs. Yeah. So that's kind of where Kirk's coming from. Spock has left Starfleet. He's left Starfleet. He's gone home to Vulcan. He's undergoing the Culinar discipline, which is supposed to be a process in which they purge their emotion. They basically get their degree in being emotionless. And at the moment where he's going to receive that amulet or whatever that indicates that he has achieved that level, he realizes, I have one thing that's out there that I need to go face, and that's the entity that's coming toward them, the V'ger probe. So that's where Spock's coming from in this movie. Kelly, I said DeForest Kelley, Dr. McCoy, he is pretty much retired. He's not thinking about coming back. He left the ship. It went into dry dock. He was done. And yet Kirk needs him to come back for this one last mission. Mm-hmm. And so, he needs that. He needs the duo with him in order for him to complete this all important task.
So needless to say, the kind of like the powerhouses of, because I'm sorry, but the rest of the cast, at least in this iteration, is pretty forgettable in a lot of aspects. And because it is what it is, and
because that was the show too.
Yeah.
The supporting cast was literally just a supporting cast. Yeah. You never had an episode that centered on Scotty or Sulu or Chekhov. They were in it, but they were never the focus of the show. The focus was always on the Holy Trinity.
Yeah, the Holy Trinity. Yeah, and that's fine. It starts to make sense though. We talk about like the social landscape. You have these three guys that are front and center the entire time, basically. And not to say there wasn't like female presence. There actually was. Like there was, what do they call it? Representation, for different races and different sexes and stuff like that, back in 1979. And I appreciated seeing that. Now, they weren't all front and center, but they were there. And I like seeing that diversity. And really, I think that's kind of a core theme found within Star Trek is don't dismiss someone just because they seem different or seem lesser or seem whatever. It was actually very embraced.
That is a theme that has existed from the 60s all the way through to today, and that is a through thread for Star Trek, definitely.
Which is nice. I always like seeing that. That there's a term where they call it whitewashed. We see that happening a lot nowadays, and I like seeing I like seeing diversity. And stuff like this, and I appreciated just the dynamic, especially with those those three characters. But it did kind of resonate with me a little bit, like, was Star Trek really going to be done like after this first movie, and then there was decisions to like make more after the fact? Can you provide some context with that? Because they leave it very much like, all right, see you later, like this is it.
Well, if you watch the movie at the end of the credits, it says the human adventure is just beginning. Mm-hmm. That was optimism by Paramount saying, we've made what we think is a blockbuster movie, and we will revisit this. Problem is, the fan reaction, while the core fandom loved the movie, the general public did not. And so it didn't do as well as Paramount Studios thought that it should. And so in 1980, there's really no plans for a follow-up to this. It really isn't for another couple of years, that after this movie comes out. It isn't until the end of 80 or end of 81 that the studio says, let's give it another go, but we're going to put other people in charge of it. And that's the origin of the next movie that's going to come along. So while Star Trek, the motion picture, was a triumph, and then it got to put the end cap on the television show and reintroduce it to an audience that was hungering for it, a fandom that was hungering for it, it wasn't terribly successful, not as a movie. And it wouldn't be until Wrath of Khan comes out in 1982 that you actually get a blockbuster out of it.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was, kind of lead up to. We're kind of coming towards the end of what I want to talk about. But to me, we talk about, we've done several game reviews, right? And we'll use Mass Effect as another example. The first Mass Effect, it was like, man, this did a lot for like sci-fi video games. Mm-hmm. But then you get into Mass Effect 2, and it's like, it's revised, it's streamlined, it's actually fun. Like,
it's better,
and it's better across the board. And you can look at the difference in the IMDb between even just the box art between motion picture Wrath of Khan. There is not even a comparison.
Which do you like better? Which of the one sheets of 1 and 2? Which do you like better?
Of like the actual posters?
Yeah, the movie posters, the one sheets.
Yeah, I mean,
I think put you on the spot, but I'm gonna.
I think there's definitely more going on in the second one for sure.
Yeah.
But for the first one is really cool looking.
It's the colors, and it's iconic.
It's iconic. It's pretty, but there's a lot of ambiguity. Whereas the second one, you can tell even just from the box art, there's going to be some action here.
Well, let me just touch on that. You said ambiguity. There was a lot. This movie did not get finished until they were still printing film, sending them out to movie theaters. It ran so close to the opening date, and this movie was. They said it's going to open at the end of 1979, and they told theaters we were going to have this movie, and they made the theaters pay for it up front. That's how they kind of funded the film. There were so many production problems, so many production woes, that production literally lasted until just a week before the movie was being released.
Whoa.
Yeah. And like the original effects director, he got fired because it was just terrible. And Paramount said, we can't handle this. So that's when they bring in Douglas Trumbull 8 months before the movie's supposed to be in theaters.
Wow.
And he completely reshoots most of this film. And so, it almost did not happen. And had it not hit theaters when it did, Paramount would have had to have paid back all of those movie theaters across the country. It would have tanked horribly. And, Paramount would never have revisited Star Trek. So we almost don't get Star Trek after 1979.
That's really crazy to think about. Like whenever you go down the rabbit hole of the history, but while it's not the best one, we should, if you're a Star Trek fan, even in the slightest bit, you should feel fortunate that you got what you got. Yeah. And I mean, it set the precedent for a lot moving forward, and was a really, honestly, like a pretty solid baseline for Wrath of Khan, because I still think Wrath of Khan's like really good. I remember watching that at your house and like really enjoying it.
It's way more entertaining.
You can just tell there's way more going on, and
it's paced differently.
It's just I mean, it's we'll leave it at that. But I mean, and it's 20-25 minutes shorter than the original one. And I remember I'm looking forward to getting to the second movie, because while I did enjoy this first movie, it's not my favorite at all. And
it won't be for everybody. For me, I've grown up with it. I'm a Star Trek fan. I love the old series, even though I started my Star Trek fandom with Next Generation, but had that opportunity to go back and appreciate the older shows. And Star Trek: The Motion Picture was the first movie that my parents showed me of anything Star Trek. I watched it in 84, I think, when it came out 86. It would have been 86. Yeah, I think that's right. When it came out on the ABC Sunday Night Movie for the first time, because we didn't have a VCR. You didn't own these things. You didn't pop them in and watch them or rent them even, because there was a lot of money back then.
Yeah.
I watched it on television on ABC on a Sunday night, and it was, blew my mind. And that was my introduction to it. And so I can sit there and agree with you that it is not the best of the movies. It is a personal favorite of mine.
Well, and honestly, I mean, it's not the best one, not even close. It might be the most important one. And that might be that might be a question. That might be a question that we revisit. I'll never forget that episode over on Age of Geek where you guys talked about Legos and how, like Star Wars was such a big movement, and Star Wars was basically responsible for saving Legos.
For saving Lego. Yeah.
And I think Star Wars was really important for a lot of different things found within the entertainment industry. Well, the same thing can be said for Star Trek, in my opinion. Maybe it didn't save Lego, but it continued to push. It continued to push the narrative that we can tell a story in space that's serious.
Yeah.
And to me, talking about like the human element, that is something that I totally get from this. Like we did a deep dive on 2001: A Space Odyssey, and that I love that movie. I absolutely love that movie. And if it came down to me watching Star Trek again, the motion picture versus 2001, I'll probably pick 2001 because it is a personal favorite.
Yeah.
But in the same way, Star Trek really motion picture pushed that narrative of we can tell a story. Yes. Like we do, like imagine life right now, literally with the politics and the nonsense and all this other stuff, but it's literally in space. Like there's that saying, there's nowhere to go but up. Yeah. It's literally taking all of the same problems we deal with on a day-to-day and putting it in a completely different setting. And that's something we see heavily, and even like modern fantasy and stuff like that, is taking something that seems unlikely and making it personable. That's something, that Star Wars hasn't done in quite some time. And I don't think it's a focus that they really, do. I think for me, Star Trek being focused on the human element is a great way to kind of sum up what it stands for. Whereas I don't think Star Wars really, there's things I love about Star Wars, but it's not really focused on that, in my opinion. It's focused on placing us in a different place and kind of taking us out of reality. Whereas there's stuff in this movie, even this first movie, where it's like, it kind of just makes you internalize. Yeah. And if that was Roddenberry's intention, bravo, because I think that's important,
Well, I kind of equate it this way. Star Wars is about doing cool stuff in space. Star Trek is about being a good person in space. That's kind of the difference there.
Yeah.
And if there's something about a character in Star Trek that you can identify with and say, I want to be more like that, you're going to find something interesting about Star Trek to glom onto. And you're going to find that it's a very enriching world to immerse yourself in.
And practical, in a lot of aspects. Whereas Star Wars, it's like, man, it'd be freaking cool to have a lightsaber, but it's never going to happen, Whereas Kirk, Kirk's going through X, Y, and Z. And I think that might be why people like to gravitate towards, the original series, which I am going to go through, even on my own time. So, kind of getting towards the end of our discussion here of stuff I wanted to talk about. Is there anything that you specifically wanted to mention before we wrap this thing up? I mean, I know there's a lot there, but
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like I said, as I've already stated, this is a personal favorite of mine. It's so wonderful to have it now in 4K and to have, if you've seen the original movie, as good as the effects are, it's not modern technology. Mm-hmm. And modern technology has really done a lot to preserve this film so that it looks good and it reaches the vision that Robert Wise had for it. That's not something that happened in the theatrical release, but now, those individuals that did the special edition in 2000, they got to work on the 4K version as well. And so I listened to another podcast that has one of the gentlemen that worked on it in 1999, 2000, and then has since worked on it again to update it for 4K. And you can there's a lot of love that's gone into preserving this film. And that's a wonderful thing because it, as you said before, it is a touchstone for this franchise, for the fandom. And while it may not be as easily reachable to broad audiences now, it's still an important film. And, I'm glad it's there because it's a little bit of what the TV show was. And it made it 10 years forward into its reboot, its continuation.
Well said. And without this movie, those characters would have stayed back in 1968 and 69,
They would have.
That's right. Because this movie came out when? 79?
79.
Yeah, so 1968 and 79.
68, 69, the last time
68,
it was 69. On screen. Yeah.
So they would have stayed there, and who knows, Captain Jean-Luc Picard probably would have never existed had this movie not been released. So that's where my argument comes from.
Definitely would not have Next Generation without the motion picture. Yeah.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, here's what our schedule is going to look like. For these are not scheduled, but this is how it's going to go. We're going to do Star Trek 2, The Wrath of Khan, Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, Star Trek 5, The Final Frontier, which you hate Star Trek 5. Isn't that correct? You hate that movie, right?
I will reveal nothing right now.
Okay.
We'll wait till we get there.
Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country. And then naturally we'll move into the Next Generation. I don't really know what that order goes. I'm assuming Star Trek First Contact would probably be the first one, correct?
Nope. Generations.
Generations, then First Contact.
Then First Contact.
Then Insurrection.
Yep.
Then Nemesis.
I might hate that one worse than 5.
I saw Nemesis in theaters.
Did you really?
I did. I went and saw it with my mom.
Wow.
That has Tom Hardy in it.
Yes, it does.
Star Trek,
very early role for him.
Yeah, very early. Star Trek, the reboot with Chris Pine, Star Trek Into Darkness, and then what was the third one that had Beastie Boys in it?
Beyond,
Beyond,
which was also in the first one. Beastie Boys was in the first one too.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, Beyond, man. That was a
ride.
And they haven't done another one since, right?
Yeah, they're talking about doing a fourth movie, but they've been talking about a fourth movie for years now. And
if they were smart, they would cancel. They would just kill that, retcon that with the new stuff, and do what you did 50, 60 years ago.
Yeah,
take these characters that people love, that this mass audience loves, and it may not be for the older school fans, but take it and develop that, and then put it on the big screen, just like you did back in the 60s.
They're kind of doing that in the shows with Strange New Worlds, which I have some caveats about the fact that they're going back to old school characters and they're putting it in this show. But for all of my misgivings, they are making an entertaining show out of Strange New Worlds. But that's a discussion for another time.
That is a discussion for another time. Ladies and gentlemen, you have made it through another episode of Keeping It Real, and I greatly, greatly appreciate it. Ethan, did you enjoy yourself? Did you have a good time?
I did. I always loved talking Star Trek, and I haven't had an opportunity since I killed Age of Geek to do it often enough. So yeah. I get a little taste of it with Ryan over on the other show that we do together, the same flavor. But Star Trek is near and dear to me, and so anytime I'm able to talk about that franchise directly, I love it.
Yeah, and here we are. It's exciting for me too to kind of casually have this kind of on the back burner, because I don't know that much about Star Trek, but I'm seeing lots of things that I grew up with, games I've played, shows I've watched. I'm seeing it all here. It's like, oh, you guys totally ripped all this off. I mean, the Orville.
Everything modern now has already happened before.
That's exactly right. Nothing is original anymore. But all internet woes aside, I enjoyed sitting down for about an hour or so to go through this with you, and I greatly look forward to our second one. It's been a good time. Fun. So, you can find me over at wannabecritic _ on Twitter. We have some other shows we do. Obviously, Keeping It Real is its own podcast feed. We have the Wannabe Critic podcast, where we kind of just do a bunch of random stuff. That's kind of where we talk about TV shows and things like that, the more frequent episodes. Me and Ethan podcast for Punch Counter Punch on that same podcast feed as well. Game Club is our gaming podcast. More news on that, coming in the future. Good news. And then me and my wife, we do a show from time to time called The Guy and His Wife that you can check out as well. And those all should be in the description down below. But if they're not, I mean, if you really want to watch it or listen to it, you will. So there's that. But Ethan, where can people find you?
Yeah, if folks want to connect with me, Twitter is typically where you'll find me, at Ethan Maestri. You can connect with me there. Let me know what you love about Star Trek, or if you love the motion picture, or if you don't. I'm always willing to talk about anything that people are willing to engage with. Also, I do a podcast with Ryan Mazzocco called Drive Back the Night, an Andromeda series podcast. We just posted episode 79. We just rolled over 18,000 downloads this week.
Wow. Congratulations, man. That's amazing.
So I'm stoked about that. And that's a show where we talk about Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda. So it kind of in a vein of Star Trek, but not exactly the same. But you can follow us at andromedaseries.podbean.com. That's where you'll find all of our episodes. And you can connect with the show on Twitter and Facebook at Andromeda Pod. So find me there. Also, I do a little stint here and there on Sci-Fi Malady. I just did a kaiju filled month of mayhem, monster mayhem. So you can look for that over at ravinglunaticmedia.com. Sci-Fi Malady.
There you have it. We always try and give you a good swath of content for whatever you're doing. A big thing for me with podcasting is I think about the people in their cars, driving. Like, I think about the people who are doing really difficult things but you can listen to a podcast. Everyone can listen to music or podcasts nowadays, or maybe you have a long drive home. And if you take time to watch our show or listen to our show while you do those things, just know, like, I know exactly how you feel, because I work really hard. I know Ethan works really hard, and we have podcasts that we like to listen to and that we gravitate towards. And that's just a special connection that you have to a medium that is very popular and continues to surprise me the more and more I dive into it. So if you take time to listen to our show, we really, really appreciate it. And we are always ears for anything that you want to talk about. So definitely give us your thoughts if you want. We really appreciate it. And that's going to wrap it up. Say goodbye, Ethan.
Auf Wiedersehen.